Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the invitation and your warm welcome. Indeed, I almost came exclusively for this occasion, and the topic will be the German unification, of course, as far as it concerned the railway system. And when I prepared this talk, I noticed, I told you already, that 2 hours are not enough. I would need more time, and therefore this talk will exclude Berlin. And I offer you the possibility to say, okay, we want more of that, give us a talk especially about Berlin. I will do so. And the original reason why I came to the United States was that I used to own this G-scale model railroad layout. Unfortunately, it has been torn down 3 weeks ago. And when I set this up, I had to do some background research and to study some of the prototypes. And therefore, I went to the northeast of your country. My first location to visit was Lincoln, New Hampshire. And there at the White Mountain Central Railroad, I met this guy who was so kind to introduce me to another club, and we start talking, and perhaps you know him closer. And when he starts talking and I starting talking, then things will last a while. So we talked all over the day, and when the evening came and the event was coming to an end, I was going to leave. And he told me, well, no, you will stay. You are invited speaker now. We will have spaghetti together. And I said, what? Invited speaker? Why? And he said, well, we spoke to each other, and I invite you now. And therefore, we had a wonderful supper. And of course, my idea was, now I owe him a talk. And this could be Wolfgang. Okay. And indeed, that's the basic reason why I came up with the idea to give a talk about this German railway system. What I do professionally, I'm a physicist, and I'm working as a science educator for the German Radiation Protection Agency, and that means that I travel around a lot in my country to such exotic places like Stralsund. You see one DMU parking here, not the one I used, but nonetheless Stralsund in the far northeast of the country. And another place I visited was Frankfurt an der Oder. And perhaps the most interesting detail about this picture is the steam loco in the background. This is a Class 64 loco that was built in 1928. Before World War II, and it was one of a series of 6-7 different locomotive classes that were built according to certain common standards how to build a loco. And one other place I one other place I visited was Helmstedt, right in the middle of the country, and I mean really in the middle of the country, and not far from this watchtower you see this sign, and it says, hier waren Deutschland und Europa bis zum 18. November 1989 um 8:30 Uhr geteilt, and you see the rest of Europe together with Germany and the border that went through Europe and in fact through the entire world. And if you enlarge Germany this way, then you have the classical composition of it after World War II. You see it was divided into 4 sectors, one for the American, the British, the French and the Russian Allied forces. And Berlin itself, you can see it here within the Soviet sector, was divided as well, the same way, 4 sectors for each Allied force. And this is how Germany fits into the rest of Europe. You have the remains of Poland, Czechoslovakia, France, Belgium, Holland, and Stralsund that I visited was about here. And so you have Germany well embedded into the European geography, and the usual train that was observed after World War II is this train, the typical passenger train in the summer of 1945. Why typical? Because the main occupation of people was to gather food, and especially in the cities they could only do so by traveling to the countryside and doing some exchange deals with farmers. They got potatoes and the farmer got carpets and watches and whatever. And the farmers became very rich in a very short time after World War II. And really, yeah, sometimes they rejected the offer. What? Another wristwatch? I already have four of them. Also, go back. And there were pretty old trains that survived the war. This is a DMU built in 1937. For its time, it was extremely fast. 160 kilometers per hour. He was operating between Berlin and Hamburg, and because it was so fast, it was called, no pun intended, the Flying Hamburger. Really. And no, you see this aerodynamical shape. This was really good for more than 150 kilometers per hour. With a good engineer, it could reach 170 for a while. And the same applied to this train, very luxurious one, the Rheingold, by the Deutsche Reichsbahn, exclusively having compartments of the first class, no second class whatsoever. And after World War II, this was used by the Allied forces for their transport demands. And when you go to the locos, this is my favorite. This is the 69 class. It's the oldest and the smallest electrical loco we have in Germany. And the funny thing about it that is that only 5 of them were built, and not 2 of them look the same. So they were ordered successively, and the manufacturer was making minor changes, and therefore this is number 3 and number 5, the last one. The strongest one looks like this, a little blown up. And that's the smallest electrical locomotive, and this one is the biggest we had for a long time in Germany. This is the E93, designed during World War II in order to pull all these heavy cargo trains from military material. And they were so successful that even after World War II, the Allied forces were allowing Germans to complete the locos that were begun before the end of the Second World War, although there was no way to build new locos. It was forbidden. This was the exception. And they are still running today. And so officially they were decommissioned in 1989. And when the German railway system was privatized, private companies were buying them and changing the paint, the livery, and the way it was before, this dark green, and now they are still operating, and they are pretty old, but they perform nonetheless.
It's a German version of GG1.
It is, in a sense, yes. It could resemble the GG1, but I personally think the GG1 is much more beautiful. And this museum where you can find all of these locos is located in Koblenz. Koblenz is in the southwest of Germany, the prototypical German Kleinstadt. Yeah, if you want to see what Germany looked like, Western Germany looked like, then go to Koblenz and you see a living cliché. Yeah. Also, this is where the river Rhine and Mosel emerge, and all of these buildings, you would expect them in a catalogue of Faller, or Vollmer, or Walters. Yeah. And
that's the corner of Germany.
That's in a sense that's the German corner, Deutsches Eck.
Yeah.
We will see this later. And not far from the banks of the Rhine, there was this hotel, and it's not standing anymore. It was torn down in the 50s, but right after World War II, the Allies were putting some lawmakers into that hotel and gave them the order to design a new German constitution. Because the old one was, of course, not a big success. And and that's where you put that. A new one. And therefore, they were working on this. It was approximately 1947 when they started. And at that time, the damages inflicted by the war were almost completely repaired. The damages were terrible. Approximately 1/3 of rolling stock and tracks were gone down, but 2 years later, everything was pretty fine again. And if you look at the classical German cargo car, the G10, I think this is unfamiliar for you. Your cargo cars are much bigger. I don't think that there are 2-axle cargo cars in America.
Just the French one sent over.
And this one is, so to say, the Volkswagen among the cargo cars. Also everybody had it. It's the one that was built the most in Germany. And you can see it still bears the inscription DR, Deutsche Reichsbahn, from the Third Reich. But below you have the inscription Brit US Zone. That was because the British and the American merged their sectors together so that the Verwaltung, the paperwork and all the legal stuff was becoming easier. And the same applies to this logo here. It's a class 50 UK. Ü is that notorious German umlaut, the U with the 2 dots on it. UK means Übergangskriegslokomotive, so provisional war locomotive. Yeah. Starting with the original class 50, which is a very heavy cargo loco, this was simplified in order to make it more easy to build and to maintain it during the war. And this was, of course, a train you see already, the Union Jack and the Stars and Stripes, indicating, this is a loco from the B zone, from the merged American-British zone. And these trains were pulling cargo trains to West Berlin, because West Berlin was within the Soviet sector. It itself was consisting of 3 sectors, American, British, French, and there was no way to get supplies, because West Berlin was surrounded by the Soviet regime, and the popular image at that time was that West Berlin was kind of an island in the Red Sea. And there was indeed a cabaret group, Die Insulaner, the island, the guys from the island, very successful. If you understand some German, I can provide you with lots of sound bites. The lyrics are great, and they gave people hope at that time. And
sure.
Unfortunately,
did the Russians stop those trains from going to Berlin?
Yes, they did.
That's when they started to fly in all
right.
of the...
In 1948,
okay.
The Russians decided, due to technical difficulties, to block all trains except the mail trains. Mail was coming through, but coal was not coming through, food was not coming through, fuel was not coming through, pharmaceuticals were not coming through. And that's where this guy kicks in. Lucius D. Clay, the High Commander of the American forces. He remembered that the Allies were allowed to use air corridors over Soviet soil, and he grabbed every single cargo plane he could get without asking Truman, and then he initiated the German airlift. And every 90 seconds for almost a year, every 90 seconds one plane was landing in my city, providing it with everything they needed, and this lasted for almost a year. You do the math. And the British were also included by supplying sea ships, and they landed on the Wannsee and also delivered their share. And this way the city survived. And one guy is extremely still, up to the present day, still very popular among Germans. It's Colonel Georg Halvorsen, and he was one of the pilots who came up with the idea to construct little parachutes out of hankies and to attach little chocolate bars to them. And prior to landing, he threw these parachutes out of the window of his plane, which made him, of course, very popular among the children. And they grabbed the sweets, and soon the Dakotas and the Skymasters had the name Rosinenbomber, or you in English call them candy bomber. And that's airlift was a complete success. And so after a year, the Soviets Stalin decided that this is not going to work, and so the blockade was over. And unfortunately, all this did not come without sacrifices.
Were they dropping the candy bars in the Soviet side, or no?
No.
Soviets don't like chocolates.
And not far from where I live, about 10 walking minutes, there is this house, and right beside of the entrance, voila, here you have this little sign. And it says, während der Berliner Blockade starben hier am 25.07.1948 beim Absturz eines Versorgungsflugzeuges 2 amerikanische Piloten für die Freiheit unserer Stadt. And up to the present day, every year, on the 25th of July, there are fresh flowers at that house. And of course, this has nothing to do with trains. And it has nothing to do with unification. But nonetheless, it has something to do with this talk. Because 2 of the children who were saved by the airlift became my parents 23 years later. So without the airlift becoming a success, chances are that I would not be standing here today. So if you have a bumper sticker on your car that says something like, if you love your freedom, thank a vet, I can assure you, also on behalf of my mother and my late father, we do.
Thank you.
Thank you for acknowledging.
Unfortunately, this didn't help the Germans, because even prior to the end of the airlift, it was very clear that the Russians were no reliable partners at all. They weren't partners at all. They were trying to starve us. And therefore, this provisional constitution, the basic law designed in Koblenz, was put into effect on May 23rd, 1949 by our first Chancellor Konrad Adenauer. And when he did this, take a guess how old he was. In the 70s, 67. He was by far the oldest chancellor we ever had, and if you have political ambitions, it's never too late. And so we had a new constitution, and we also got a new national anthem. The music was still the same, the Kaiser Quartet by Joseph Haydn, but the lyrics were changed. It was no more Deutschland, Deutschland über alles, Germany above all, but the third stanza, and that fitted our feelings much better. And the same way, I had the impression that you Americans are very much connected to your flag. You see flags everywhere. And the same way you are connected to your country by your flag. That's why you have the Pledge of Allegiance, an oath through your flag. We are connected to our country through our national anthem. And therefore it's not special that at one place with us, the Bundesplatz, the Federation Plaza, which has a subway station of its own, you have the wall tiles painted with the notes and the lyrics of our national anthem. And this is how it looks.
Oh, neat.
Einigkeit und Recht und Freiheit. It's a wish for our country that we sing when we articulate these lyrics. We asked for Einigkeit, which is unity. We asked for Recht, which is justice. And we asked for Freiheit, which is liberty. And unfortunately, in 1949, there was no unity. Because shortly after our Chancellor Adenauer proclaimed the Basic Law, only 3 weeks after this, the East Germans were founding East Germany. The Soviet zone was becoming Eastern Germany. The communist dictatorship. No free elections, no free speech, no nothing. And they hadn't justice and they hadn't liberty. So, from this wish, Einigkeit und Recht und Freiheit, nothing was realistic in the upcoming future. And instead of one Germany, we unfortunately now pick two.
I don't know if you're aware of it, but that melody is used in a Christian church as a hymn.
It is?
Yes.
Oh, great! I should look this up. And of course, both of these Germanys needed a railway system. And so, two railway systems were founded in Western Germany, which is a very federal state. You know this by the name Federal Republic of Germany, just like the United States. You had the Deutsche Bundesbahn, and Bund means federal, Bundesplatz, yeah, Federation Plaza. And the East German competitor, official competitor, was the Deutsche Reichsbahn of East Germany. And perhaps you wonder why they kept the same name. Reichsbahn, Reich, yeah, Third Reich.
Okay.
Reich is a word that encompasses realm and empire. And neither had we a king or an emperor. And therefore Reich is completely inappropriate. And the reason why they chose the name Reich was simply because during the talks prior to the defeat of Germany, the conferences of Tehran and Yalta, the Allied forces decided that the railway system within Berlin, all 4 sectors of Berlin, would be managed by the Soviets. And they feared if somebody would change the name Reichsbahn, then it would be a different company. And if it would be a different company, the Soviets would lose their right to manage and to operate the Berlin railway system. And that's why they tried to eliminate the term Deutsch in every other respect, but not with Reichsbahn, Deutsche Reichsbahn. So, and the first loco that was built after World War II is the class 82-001. It's multi-purpose loco that can pull almost everything as long as it's not too heavy. If it is too heavy, you take 2 of them. And this was the first loco to follow new design paradigms devised by Friedrich Witte. You see the boiler is almost void of any tubings. That's one sign that we have a new loco, fewer tubings on the boiler. And the second improvement was that every bearing was realized by roller bearings instead of normal ones, reducing the friction. And also in 1950, the class 23.
One question.
Yes, sir.
That one. Is that an external water tank on the side, or is that just?
No, it's another one. It's another loco.
No.
This one, yes, this is a water tank.
Okay.
Indeed. And this is the class 23. 100 of them were built. The last steam loco ever built in Western Germany was also a 23 class, and she had indeed an external tank, and she was also designed in order to be able to pull cargo and passenger trains. Not for shunting, you used the 82 for that, and this was the first real full-grown loco in West Germany. And despite of that, of course, you used the old locos as well. This is an E18, an old electrical loco built in 1939 in Berlin by AEG, and she kept her beautiful blue livery. Because to indicate that it's an express train loco. The faster it gets, the bluer it gets. And
Is that the knuckles on the engineer?
I mean,
The knuckles on the
Yes.
engineer gets blue and blue?
and unfortunately, you had a situation now, especially after the blockade, that two economic systems were crashing into each other. The economical system of West Germany was capitalism, democracy, competition, and so on. And here in East Germany, you had a communist, what is in German called Planwirtschaft, a planned economy, where every 5 years people would write down a plan, what people would need, and this plan had nothing to do with reality. It never had up to 1990. But of course, people were escaping to West Germany. They did what we call in German mit den Füßen abstimmen, vote with your feet. And therefore, you had a strong movement in this direction. Take a guess how many people escaped through the entire lifetime of East Germany from east to west?
100,000?
No,
Gotta
more.
be millions.
3 millions
3 million.
out of 18 millions.
Wow.
And therefore,
Every 6.
East Germany was building a frontier, not yet the wall. It was yet a fence, and it looks quite inviting.
Except it's electrified.
Can you tell why it isn't?
It's a minefield.
Yes, it's a minefield first. You had a 10-meter field that was mowed down, and yes, there were claymores. And after that, you had a strip of 500 meters across where nobody was allowed to live. If somebody lived there, he was repatriated. And 5 kilometers from that border, you were allowed to live, but you needed a special residence permit to be there. And nonetheless, this was brutal. First because of the claymores, and do you see some more?
There's a cross up there.
Yeah.
That's where you got
Of course,
shot.
they were shooting.
Yeah.
And when they shot one, they got additional money.
Yeah.
It was just like headhunting.
Yeah, about it.
And
That was capitalism.
approximately, obviously, the same problem also occurred between, not only between West Germany and East Germany, it also occurred between East Germany and West Berlin. And therefore, they did the same thing between these two compartments, because they had space. Yeah? So the only way for you to get to West Berlin and into freedom was to take this way from the Soviet sector to East Berlin and then to West Berlin. That plan, because this border was as heavily guarded as this one. If you wanted to enter from the Soviet zone to East Berlin, to the Soviet part of Berlin, you also were controlled. What are you doing here? Do you have a travel permit? And so on. Because legally, and up to 1990, legally, Berlin in its entirety was not a part, neither of the Bundesrepublik nor of Eastern Germany. Okay, the Soviets didn't give a shit about that. They behaved exactly the other way around. But nonetheless, this was the law. And if you now consider the problems people had with the political system, there was growing unhappiness with the political system, and that this led to protests and strikes on the 17th of June in 1953. People were protesting against changes in the working laws, so that people had to work more to get the same money, and because the wages were ordered by the state, you couldn't change a thing about them. And the reaction of the East German government was typical. They retreated to their tracks of this tank so that it could not move but only turn around. It didn't help. What about the time of your camera? It's great? Fine. Okay. And now we go back to Koblenz, to the Deutsches Eck. Yeah, it's really called the Deutsches Eck, the German corner, Rhine, Mosel, and this huge statue over here. And because we are a federal state, you see lots and lots of flags of the states. And if you look closer, you see one more flag. Yours. Although Koblenz is located, or used to be located, in the French zone. I don't see a French flag here. And this indicates the strong bonds between Germans and Americans, at least from our side. And if you go closer to this statue, if you climb it, would not recommend it nonetheless, because it's my heart, you see. And the first thing you see, trains. Yeah. On both banks of the Rhine, you have a very extremely beautiful set of tracks going down the River Rhine. And this castle over here is the one I shot the picture in the beginning. And when you look down to this statue, it's hard not to become a patriot.
I agree.
And okay, so come over to us.
I stood there when you took this picture from.
Yes, great. And this is really beautiful. And if you go down that statue and look to the floor, you see this. Since 1953, this statue was dedicated as a monument for German unity, because we have in our basic law the commandment to complete the unity of Germany in freedom and free self-determination. And that's what this sign says. So we have the task now to fix this problem somehow, to get unified somehow. And ever since 53, it was clear, do it. And we did. And
Excuse me.
let's see how this worked. Yes?
It was in English.
Yes, it was in English.
I mean, I didn't mean to state the obvious.
There were two. There were
But-
two of them. One German, one English.
Okay.
No French.
The Germans and the French didn't get along too well.
Yes, one of my grandfathers felt extremely well in France, 1941. Also, I don't think that this is mutual. Okay, and the French saw it a little differently, perhaps. And okay, these were the electrical locos we have built. 1954, 4 basic classes were commissioned. One very heavy, it's the 150, 6 axles, so to say the successor of this E93 stuff, the bulky, edgy one. And this one is the smallest one, E41, designed to pull light trains, may it be passenger trains or cargo trains, and the other two, E40 and E10, were technically almost identical, but the transmission with the tooth wheels was slightly different, so that the E10 was faster and the E40 was stronger. Any other parts were interchangeable. And you see these are blue, these are green. Why? Because these can run more than 120 kilometers per hour. These can't, they are quite slow. But why should they be fast? It's for cargo trains. And if you compare the development of locos in West Germany and East Germany, you see that the number schemes of both West Germany and East Germany were kept compatible. So that if the unification should come, nothing would have to be changed. Yeah? We in the West had no E42, and they hadn't an E10. Yeah? So this would fit perfectly into each other. There was no official order given by any side to do it that way. It simply was done that way. Nobody knows if people said we should do the numbers like this or that, but it fit. Yeah? And the problem was that East Germany was lacking good engineers. Why? Take a guess. Are the East Germans more stupid? They went either to the west, and even the one that were staying in the east were not as successful as their western counterparts were. Why?
No initiative.
Pardon me?
No initiative.
Yes. Okay. If you have a military officer who says, okay, you will build this loco in 3 months, otherwise you go to the gulag. Yes, you are motivated. But it didn't work. Why?
Wrong kind of motivation.
Pardon me?
Wrong kind of motivation.
Yes, that made them go away. But if you were studying engineering or medicine or physics or you name it, you were forced by the statutes of your university to study 20% Marxism. Hello? Engineering? Marxism? Do you see the error here? I mean, Marxism doesn't help you to become a good engineer. It perhaps helps you to become a streamlined citizen. Yeah? And therefore, the people were less efficient because they were forced to learn some shit. Yeah? And therefore, the East German engineers were not capable of constructing a lock like this or like this by themselves. Instead, they said, we can't do this. Please, let's buy the licenses and buy to copy this local legally. And the high command of the East German Reichsbahn said, no, we can't do this, we are in the Cold War, this is the Klassenfeind, the class enemy, and therefore, are you nuts? You will build a loco of your own. And they did. And therefore, some years later, the E-42 came up, not as powerful as their Western counterparts, but this should be the way to go in the next 40 years. Not because people were stupid, but because they were forced to do some other thing. And 1956, the same happened as happened in Germany, but in Hungary, because people were hungry. No, sorry, no pun intended. They were also protesting against the bad living conditions. They protested against Stalin, and the reaction of the communist regime was thus just the same as in Germany. Call the Soviet tanks, flatten everything down, and be happy again. And the result was, if you show this figure, that the number of refugees from East Germany exploded every time there was an uprising. May it be in Germany or in Hungary. And in the meantime, of course, the technical development went on, and we commissioned in the West the class 66, the last class to be commissioned, and the engineers who were using it were ecstatic about it. Obviously, this was the perfect loco. There was, if they were given a questionnaire, what would you do differently? They said, no, nothing. It's fine. And yeah, but unfortunately, we only had 2 of them. Why? Because after that, diesel, electro.
Yeah.
And the East Germans, of course, tried the same. You see this crazy guy with the camera. I don't know where. That's okay. They constructed a DMU, a big one, a fast one, was capable of 120 kilometers per hour. They constructed a little one, the so-called Schienenbus rail bus, or as they put it in East Germany, Ferkeltaxe. It's Ferkeltaxe means piggy taxi, because they were used by the farmers to transport all their livelihood. Yes, you could have used a cargo train, but okay, it was somewhat
cheaper by the hoof.
I think so. And this loco came later. It is a Soviet loco, one of the most heavy locos we have in Germany now after the unification, and it was commissioned in 1970. I will tell you why it happened so late in the upcoming slides. In the meantime, we had a intermediate class V100. The numbers behind the V. V is okay. V is Verbrennung, which means internal combustion. It's diesel. And the electrolocos had, for obvious reasons, the E in front of the number, and the number itself indicates the power in horsepowers divided by 10. So this has approximately 1,000 horsepowers. The big one, with the egg-shaped front, had 2,000 horsepowers, and that was, for our German demands, completely sufficient. I learned that in the US, I see it, that in the US you are having locos with 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 horsepower. We don't need that because our trains are shorter. Because if we would build such long trains like you, then the tip of the train, the front of the train would arrive in the destination city while the last car is still in the... Okay.
That's like our layout.
I just wanted to ask you to repeat what the V stood for.
Verbrennung, combustion.
Okay.
Yeah? If something burns, it's verbrennt. Right. Okay. And this is, in my opinion, this is, it is a beautiful logo. Guess how many we had of them?
One.
Two.
Same reason.
Yeah.
The diesel, the V200, was far too popular and far too efficient for this loco to be competitive. But nonetheless, it looks great.
Reminds me of the A4, sorry.
One of the things in the U.S. that killed steam locomotives was the amount of labor necessary to maintain the locomotives. Were German steam locomotives any better from that cost standpoint, or similar?
I don't know, but I would suppose that the new ones, after the new design guidelines, were optimized in that way. They even had floor heating and a place to cook your food during the ride. Yeah? So I would think that guys would come up with some ideas to make this more economical, especially with this class by introducing an oil tender, so that you would have to shovel coal, but to pump oil. Of course, when it's cold, the oil is quite solid, and you have to heat it beforehand, and then you can pump it. But I think the discrepancies between West Germany and the US shouldn't be so big, because the first thing I would do as a German train engineer, I would look what the other countries were doing while we were at war. Yes, you were too, I know, but you were not completely occupied by it. Yeah? We were, and therefore I think the guys from Minden, where the design center was, they looked definitely to Switzerland, and they constructed the electrical locos by the example of the Swiss AE44 that was having no side rods, yeah? And we did it the same way. And I would think that a similar action would have been taken concerning the steam locos to make them more efficient.
Is this a 2 or 3 cylinder?
This is a 3-cylinder. This is controlling on the left-hand side. On the other side, you have the right cylinder, and this here is the control for the 3rd cylinder, which is in the middle.
Right. Well, I think this was one reason we were. I can't remember who asked the question about maintenance. The U.S. railroads experimented with a 3-cylinder, and they dropped it, as I believe the English also did, because the maintenance of that 3rd cylinder, which is obviously in between the wheels, and you have to have a special crank, it probably is on the 1st or 2nd driver, was such a stinker to get to.
It is.
Yeah, it was such a stinker to get to make sure you had proper lubrication, especially when you had the plain bearings instead of the roller bearings. The U.S. railroad just kind of threw it out the window and went to just this 2-cylinder.
On the contrary, the British were doing everything inside of the frame.
That's true. Yeah,
And
right.
they kept their steam engines even longer than we did.
Yeah.
Also, but this is my favorite for aesthetical reasons.
Oh, it's beautiful.
And yes, in the meantime, East Germany was trying to catch up, and they tried to construct the V180. 180, okay, 1,800 horsepower. And when I say with great difficulty, I mean that they were having trouble with constructing the engines and constructing the power transmission from the engine to the wheel. Because in Germany, for reasons I don't know, the diesel electric traction was not about the engines already and the power transmission. Yes. Okay. Two companies, one German, one Austrian, was able to construct this hydraulic gear, Föttinger and Voigt, and East Germany was in the first place trying to buy these machines legally. Was not successful, but they had a very powerful secret service, which was able to set up phantom companies who happened to need some hydraulical gear system, and by that they were able to purchase the components they needed for this loco, without actually buying it as Deutsche Reichsbahn. And that's the only way they got this thing running. It's a 4-axle diesel engine, and sometime later they noticed that it was too heavy for most of the tracks they had. And then, okay, this was quite easy to fix. They introduced a 3rd axle in each truck, and then it was able to go to the farthest outskirts of the country because the weight was better distributed. And this was in 1960, and this I should expect. Because this is another beautiful baby, this time from East Germany. It's the 18201, and this loco was commissioned. It's unique. It's only one type, this one. It's a mixture of a French loco and an old German loco and some new parts. So it's a bastard. But it can run 180 kilometers per hour. And it is, up to the present day, the fastest operational steam loco in the world. Wow. It still runs. And the reason why East Germany was in need of such a fast loco was that they wanted to introduce inter-urban trains that could run 160 kilometers per hour. And therefore they had to design new coaches and new trucks for the coaches and so on, and therefore they need a loco that was able to pull at these speeds. And this was 18201. They could have as well constructed an electrical loco. Unfortunately, the overhead line wasn't ready. Why? Because the Russians gathered all of the second tracks. Usually you have 2 tracks beside of each other, and right after World War II the Russians were taking away 1 track, and they were taking away the overhead line of both tracks, rendering of course the development of electrical locos completely useless. But they did it officially for, how was the term, reparation. In my opinion it's revenge, because of course these tracks were completely useless to them. They had a completely different gauge. Their tracks, their rails are broader. They are 1.6 meters and not 1.435 meters. So they had to re-gauge this. And they gave back all of the equipment 10-20 years later, and it was in a terrible condition. So the Reichsbahn had completely rusted locos, completely rusted overhead lines, rotten rails, melted, built something new out of it. And of course, so that's why they needed a steam loco, because building fast diesel locos was also impossible. Same problem here. Where are the strong diesel engines? Where is the power transmission? No way. Therefore they had to build a steam engine. And this was, as I told you, in the year 1961. This is a statistic that shows how many people were leaving from East Germany between 1949 and 1961. The original population was approximately 18 million, and from that you see every year there was a considerable amount of people going to the west. This was still possible because okay, that fence was not that nice, and also the booby traps weren't that nice, but with Berlin as a loophole, something was possible. And one of the guys who was trying to escape was a colleague of my mother. She used to work as a haircutter. Is it called that way? Friseur? Coiffeur? Haircutter?
Yeah.
Okay. And her colleague was living in the eastern part, working in the western part, and as almost all coiffeurs, he was gay, and being gay in East Germany was even worse than at that time being gay in the West, and therefore he was planning to move to West Germany, to West Berlin permanently. So he moved bit by bit all of his personal belongings, including furniture and everything, to the western part. He was earning well, because the West German currency, the D-Mark that was used in West Berlin and the western part of Germany, was very strong compared to the Ostmark. One Westmark was as powerful as 4 Ostmarks, and therefore he could afford a second flat in West Berlin, and there he transported all of his personal belongings. And he intended to move permanently in the early hours of the 14th of August 1961, but unfortunately he didn't came that far. And forgive me, but I refuse to comment on what happened next. You need one? Okay.
The official.
Just take a deep breath.
When did that movie come out? Escape from East Berlin.
Movie?
There was a movie, yeah, black and white movie when I was about 10 years old.
I don't think he'd know. He was
How
over
old are
there.
you?
Wow, I'm older than you.
Trying to look it up. Trying to figure it out.
About 1961. And that movie, I was probably 10 years old, maybe 8 when I seen it, and I had nightmares for weeks about that.
You are not the only one. And there are still, no, I will talk about this right in a minute.
Okay.
And so, this affected, of course, the railway system, and it affected it in that it was it was provoking the ingenuity of people. And that, of course, also the railway engineers were thinking about ways to get rid of this wall and to get over to Western Germany. And the thing is that the batteries of my pointer are slowly degrading, but nonetheless, I will do it that way. This is a steam loco that is much older than East and West Germany. This is a class 78. It's a loco produced in Prussia. It's the predecessor of Berlin and Brandenburg. And this loco, as you can see, is constructed almost completely symmetrical, so that you can go in both directions with the same speed and without turning the loco. And for the border produced lots and lots of new border stations between East and West. The need for these locos increased. And one of the stations that was affected is Albrechtshof. This is the map of Albrechtshof as it looks right now. And you see there's nothing special about it. You have a little station, 2 tracks as it should be. Aha! The Russians had torn down the second track, but it has been replaced ever since. And this is the way the station looks like right now. You are going this way to Berlin and this way to the east. And that's the way the system looks right now. But in 1961 it looked like this. The orange strip is the wall. And this station Albrechtshof was obviously, how is it called in English, a terminus, final station. And so, one of the engineers who had to come up with an idea how to escape was this guy. It's Harry Deterling and his 4 children and his wife. And he had a good sense of humor that was shown by jokes of him like, imagine the desert Sahara would get a communist government. What would happen?
Would run out of sand.
Yes, for 10 years nothing would happen, and then they would start to run out of sand. Good pun. But in East Germany, this meant 5 years in prison, minimum. And that's the prison I'm talking about. It's the prison for political inmates. It's Hohenschönhausen on the outskirts of Berlin, and the supply of political prisoners was so big in East Germany that it had a railway station of its own. And the cars, you can see, were fitted out with lattices in front of the windows so that nobody could jump out. And this is a coach provided from the station of Magdeburg. And when you got into this prison, this was your usual cell. It had, as you can see, rubber walls so that you won't get hurt. The guards would do that for you. And this was the standard cell. The non-standard, if you behaved. If you didn't behave, you got another type of cell, this one. It's also made of rubber, but can you tell the difference?
The patterns.
The patterns, why is the pattern different? Because this cell
You can hurt yourself.
is watertight.
Oh.
So, depending on the gravity of your crime, they filled your cell with water. Depending on the gravity of your crime, to the ankles, to the waist, to the shoulders, or even higher. And also depending on the gravity of your crime, they decided how warm the water should be. Freezing, cold, warm, or perhaps even hotter. So if you Americans are slightly embarrassed about Guantanamo, forget about it.
Yeah.
Okay, we Germans didn't invent torture, but we put it to perfection. And of course, Detailing was not keen to have this experience, and he was thinking about something. And the thing he thought together with his firemen on that loco was to take a passenger train rolling to Albrechtshof, but instead of stopping at the station, he would let the loco roll. Lock and roll. And he discussed this with his family, and in the final result, out of the 32 persons sitting in this train, 24 were friends and relatives of Detailing. And not a single spy of the East German Secret Service, which is an achievement.
Yeah.
And, okay, where's the problem here? If you want to roll right over to West Berlin, you have to prevent one unnoticing passenger to pull the emergency brake. And therefore, he disengaged the emergency brake by opening a certain vent within the loco, so that the loco could brake, but the coaches couldn't. And he put this into action on the 6th of December 1961. And of course, beforehand on another station, all of his friends and family were entering the train, and then off they went to Albrechtshof, and what he did was this. So here's West Berlin, outskirts of, and here is East Germany, and then he rolled, came to a halt, and of course a resident saw him, and saw the train, and called the police and said, wait, there is a train standing on the tracks, Mr. Officer. And because it was right before Christmas and before Sylvester, the policeman was saying, yes, great, it's a little bit early for Sylvester jokes.
New Year's for you guys.
Pardon me?
New Year's is Sylvester. I don't use that term.
Oh, yeah, sorry, okay. And the thing is that, okay, one hour later, the press came, policemen came, and they realized, yeah, there really is a train on the tracks. And I only knew this with elephants in rooms. But obviously this was very strange thing to have. And interestingly, this train was not being shot at by the border policemen. You would expect them to shoot at a train they would not expect. They didn't. Of course, Detailing was taking precautions. He was hiding in the coal tender in the rear of his loco together with his firemen, because it's steel and nothing should happen. And indeed, nothing happened. Nobody shot at them. Why? Because 20 minutes after that train, there was another regular train to be expected that was bound to East Berlin, about there. So he would legally trespass, enter West Berlin, exit West Berlin, go into East Berlin, and there was his terminus. And therefore, most probably, the guy sitting in the border patrol tower thought, this is the train, he's just a little bit early. Yeah. And therefore, this was a success. This is the coach of the train. This is the typical head of the West Berlin policeman. And yes, this was a happy ending, and everything was fine. The train was pushed back into East Germany, and everybody was happy. And, okay, everybody, no, not everybody. The border police management was not happy. And this was the main problem with the ingenuity of the Germans. Because every time they figured out a new way to escape, the border police was retrofitting their system. So, if you have, consider this picture, this is another border railway station which is called Griebnitzsee, which is in the southwest of Berlin. So you have West Berlin. I turned this plan around because the original map was upside down, so that the north was downwards, and therefore I turned it. But because you don't have to read the descriptions, it will work nonetheless. East Germany here, West Berlin there. Just imagine you would be trying to do the same thing as Detaling did with this station. What do you see? You see on every turnout, here, where else, there, whatever track you choose, you will run into this how is it called, buffer stop. Yeah. And these types of turnouts were designed in a way that the default position was off the track to the buffer stop. And only if the border policeman in the railway station was allowing the dispatcher to switch the turnout, then he was allowed to do so. Later, this was even more complicated in that when you opened the semaphore about here in order to let the train into the station, then a clock started ticking, and only 5 minutes after that this turnout could be adjusted to give way the train into the west, so that automatically the border policeman would have time to check if everything would be okay. Such an event as with Detaling would not happen again. And this is one technological solution for this problem that was creating new problems after the unification, of course, because you had to stop every train. I mean every train. This lasted for months, and only then this electronic system was replaced by a new one that hadn't these faults, so that the express trains after the unification could pass through the border stations. Another story I would almost buy is this escape using a 52 loco. These 52 locos you know already. It's the new name of this Übergangskriegslokomotive I showed you prior to the Berlin blockade. And she has here a little compartment. It's not intended to be a compartment to be suitable for a person, but it's just a piece of metal supporting the boiler and making a connection to the truck down here. And a person could hide here. And if I show you the movie now, please note how this shape is formed of this compartment. I needed an excuse to show this movie. It's the class 52, and then look at this compartment at the front. Yes, we also have steam events here in Germany.
That's the back, right?
Yes, that's the cold hand on the back, right? There it is. You see?
Yeah.
And so, a big advantage of this loco, by the way, is that it also can run in both directions with the same speed of 80 kilometers per hour. So no need for a turntable. If you want to construct a layout of yourself, of a German railroad, I would suggest to have at least one class 50, because you can use it for everyone, for everything.